At my wife's funeral, my son said her birthday didn't matter. His wife's party did. He laughed while music played in the background, then hung up on me. I stood alone at the graveside, silent, crossing his name off the program. Months later, I fired him from my company, cut him out of my will, and bought his foreclosed house. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The morning sun cast a pale, indifferent light across Davenport as Richard Hale adjusted his black tie for the third time in the hallway mirror. His hands trembled despite years of discipline that had once built an empire out of raw timber and steel. The reflection staring back at him looked older than he remembered, creased, weary, hollowed out since Eleanor's passing. Her absence pressed against the walls of the house like an unrelenting fog. On the kitchen counter, her coffee cup remained untouched, the faint trace of lipstick still on the rim. The room was silent without her humming, without the clatter of dishes she always insisted on putting away before he left for work. Even the air felt wrong, as if the house itself mourned with him. Richard reached for the phone, dialing with stiff fingers. 4 rings, and then the voice of his son filled the line. "Yeah, Dad?" Michael sounded groggy, the muffled roar of music and laughter echoing in the background. Richard's jaw tightened. "The funeral starts at 11:30, Richard said, forcing his voice to stay steady. "I'll see you there, show." Michael cleared his throat, the sound of Samantha's shrill laughter cutting through behind him. "Dad, I told you yesterday, Samantha's birthday is tonight. We've been planning this for months. Caterers, the band, the decorations, it's a big deal. Mom's not coming back, but Samantha only turns 32 once. You understand, right?" The words struck Richard like ice water down his spine. "Your mother's funeral is today, Michael. Once in a lifetime." There was no pause, no second thought on the other end of the line. "Look, Mom raised me for 35 years, and I appreciate that, but I can't abandon Samantha on her special day. I'll make it up to you." The line went dead. The dial tone buzzed in Richard's ear, a flat, merciless sound that told him more about his son than any conversation ever had. For 3 long minutes, he sat motionless at the kitchen table, staring at Eleanor's reading glasses resting beside the phone. The wall clock ticked steadily, marking time that now belonged only to him. His wedding band caught a shard of sunlight through the window, glinting against the dark fabric of his suit. He reached for the funeral program and drew a pen through his son's name with deliberate, unshaking strokes. At the cemetery, rows of faces turned expectantly when the pastor called for the pallbearers. Patricia Morton, Eleanor's sister, whispered the question he had dreaded. "Where's Michael?" Richard's lips formed the answer he had rehearsed. "Important commitments." The words tasted like ash. 23 people gathered to honor the woman he had loved for 4 decades. Their friends from church, neighbors from down the street, Eleanor's garden club companions, all stood present. Only their son was absent, his empty place beside the casket, a wound too large to ignore. Richard held himself rigid, refusing to let his grief betray him. Mrs. Henderson leaned in close, her voice a soft whisper. "She was so proud of that boy, always talking about his success." He nodded, though his throat had closed tight. Eleanor had defended Michael with the fierce loyalty of a mother, excusing every absence, every missed appointment during chemo treatments. "He's just busy with his new life," she had said, her faith in him unwavering even as her strength failed. When the pastor spoke of eternal love and family bonds, Richard watched the dirt fall onto Eleanor's coffin. Each shovelful buried not only his wife, but the illusions he had clung to about their son. Driving home, his hands locked so tightly on the steering wheel his knuckles shone white. The passenger seat lay empty beside him, where Eleanor had always insisted they take her small Honda instead of his truck because it was better for the environment. The radio played her favorite song. He shut it off. Their street greeted him with its familiar neat lawns and painted mailboxes, the quiet life they had built together. Pulling into the driveway, Richard sat for a long moment before entering the house. The front door key clicked in the lock, echoing through the silence. He hung the keys on the little hook Eleanor had installed, an everyday action now monumental in its finality. Inside, the house breathed memories. No television murmuring in the background. No hum of Eleanor's voice drifting from the kitchen. only the groan of old floorboards and the weight of 40 years pressing down. He loosened his tie and sank into the brown leather armchair Eleanor always said clashed with her floral curtains. She had wanted to redecorate for years, and he had put it off, too busy with the business. Now those curtains would never change. On the mantel, their wedding photo smiled back at him. Eleanor at 23, radiant in her grandmother's lace dress, eyes shining with promises they had both kept. Richard had given her everything, except perhaps the son she deserved. The memories flooded unbidden. Michael taking his first steps in the living room, birthday parties with paper decorations because they couldn't afford anything else. Eleanor working double shifts at the diner while Richard built the company from nothing. She had never complained, not once, not when they lived on macaroni and cheese, not when Richard worked 16-hour days. "We're building Michael's future," she whispered on weary nights, holding their boy between them. Later, Richard found Eleanor's Bible on her nightstand, a folded note slipping out between psalms. He unfolded it with trembling hands. "My dearest Richard, please don't let Michael forget us. We gave him everything we had. I hope that was enough. All my love, E." The ink blurred as his vision swam. He pressed the letters to his chest, the house silent but for the sound of his own breaking heart. Richard Hale had buried his wife that morning, but as dusk settled over Davenport, he realized he had buried something else as well, the last fragile hope that his son still belonged to him. Night settled heavily over the Hale home, cloaking each familiar corner in a silence that felt deeper than grief. Richard moved through the rooms like a man tracing the edges of a vanished world, his footsteps echoing against hardwood that had once carried Eleanor's laughter. Her perfume lingered faintly in the bedroom, as if the walls themselves refused to let her go. He sat on the edge of their bed, where Eleanor's Bible rested on the nightstand. The leather cover bore the imprint of her touch, the pages worn soft from years of quiet prayers. As Richard opened it, a folded slip of paper drifted to the floor. He bent to retrieve it, his chest tightening before he even read the words. "My dearest Richard," the note began in her careful script. "Please don't let Michael forget us. We gave him everything we had. I hope that was enough. All my love, E." Richard pressed the note against his heart. The plea felt like her final breath still whispering in the room. His hands shook as he replaced the Bible, unwilling to let go of her voice. The closet held another discovery, one Eleanor had hidden away with quiet devotion. On the top shelf sat a plain wooden box. Richard pulled it down, dust rising like ghosts around him. Inside, he found a lifetime cataloged with care. Every report card Michael had ever received, starting with kindergarten scribbles to polished transcripts from college. Eleanor had written tiny notes in the margins. "So proud. Our brilliant boy." Photographs followed. Michael's graduation in his cap and gown. The degree Eleanor had worked overtime hours to help pay for. Richard stared at the smiling face of his son, so proud, so oblivious to the sacrifices that had paved his path. The memories came in waves, and with them came numbers. Richard reached for a calculator from the desk, the click of its buttons sharp against the hush of the house. Tuition, $208,000. Graduate school, $48,000. The down payment for Michael's first home, $350,000. The wedding to Samantha, with every extravagant detail Eleanor had quietly accepted, $75,000. The car, the loans, the endless request. The total climbed higher, each figure a wound reopening. When the sum finally glowed on the screen, Richard stared at it in disbelief. $847,000, nearly $1 million. His life's labor poured into his son's ungrateful hands. Richard leaned back in his chair, the room spinning with the weight of it. He thought of his father, a hard, unyielding man who had handed him a $20 bill and a warning the day he left home. "Build your own character," his father had said, offering no more than that. Richard had vowed to be different, to give his child everything he never had. Now he wondered if that vow had been his undoing. He opened another folder Eleanor had kept tucked away. Inside, her private notebook recorded sacrifices that even Richard had not noticed. Anniversary dinner canceled. Michael needed $5,000 for car repair. Postponed doctor visit. Sent money for Samantha's birthday gift. Bought generic groceries this month. Covered Michael's mortgage shortfall. Each line cut deeper than the last. Eleanor had carried the burden quietly, never reproaching, always justifying their son's needs over her own. The final entry stilled his breath. We gave Michael everything. I hope he remembers us kindly. Richard set the notebook down, staring at the words as if they were carved in stone. They revealed a truth he had refused to face. Michael had taken their devotion and twisted it into expectation. Love had become obligation, and obligation had become exploitation. The house was unbearably quiet. Richard walked into the living room and lowered himself into Eleanor's favorite floral armchair. Across from him, the wedding portrait glowed faintly in the lamplight. Eleanor at 23, radiant, fearless, trusting. She had believed their sacrifices would secure Michael's future. She had believed in their son even when Richard's doubts had grown. He whispered to the photograph, "You were wrong about him, Ellie. Or maybe I was." Darkness pressed against the windows. A car pulled into the driveway, the engine idling for a moment before retreating. Richard didn't rise to look. If Michael wanted to come, he knew where the door was. Instead, Richard remained still, the weight of decades pressing against his chest. At dawn, he sat at his desk again, spreading file folders into neat rows. College tuition, the house, the wedding, every transaction marked with precision. His coffee grew cold beside him as he scrolled through years of bank statements, each one bearing Michael's name. The calculator clicked steadily. 47 loans in 15 years. Vacations disguised as emergencies. Samantha's failed ventures propped up by Eleanor's overtime shifts. Margaret's, that name slipped through his thoughts, but he corrected himself. Eleanor's final months overshadowed by their son's endless appetite. By the time the sun rose, Richard no longer saw grief on the papers before him. He saw evidence. Evidence of betrayal, of misplaced love, of a son who had mistaken generosity for weakness. The phone rang. Michael's name flashed across the caller ID. Richard stared at it, his thumb hovering over the receiver. Eleanor's photo watched from the corner of the desk, her eyes filled with the same hope she had carried to her last breath. When Richard finally answered, his voice carried a steadiness born of something harder than sorrow. "Yes, Michael?" For the first time in decades, he was ready to listen without giving in. The phone's ring cut through the morning hush like a blade. Richard Hale sat at his desk, the same one where he had spent sleepless hours tallying up the true cost of his son. Files lay spread before him, precise rows of numbers that told a story of sacrifice without gratitude. Eleanor's photo watched from the corner, her eyes filled with a quiet trust that now felt like accusation. The screen flashed with Michael's name. Richard let it ring 4 times before he lifted the receiver. "Hey, Dad." Michael's voice came light and casual, almost cheerful, as though nothing monumental had happened the day before. "I hope you're doing okay after yesterday." Yesterday. That was how he referred to his mother's funeral. Not once did he say the word. Not once did he ask how Richard managed to stand alone beside Eleanor's grave while the son she adored chose a birthday party instead. "I'm managing," Richard answered evenly. "Good, good." Michael's tone shifted, sliding into its familiar rhythm, the cadence he always used when a request was coming. "Listen, we need to cover some unexpected kinda. Samantha's party was amazing. Everyone loved it. But things kind of got out of hand. We hired this incredible band, took the whole group to the new steakhouse downtown, got Sam a diamond bracelet. She deserves the best, right? But now the credit card bills are hitting, and we're looking at about $15,000 in immediate payments. Could you wire it to my account today?" The words hung heavy in the silence that followed. Yesterday, Richard had lowered Eleanor into the ground. Today, his son wanted $15,000 for a party. He glanced at the photograph beside him, Eleanor's smile frozen in time, her handwritten note tucked in his pocket like a wound. Then he looked back at the papers scattered across the desk, each line a record of years spent financing Michael's life. "No," Richard said. The single syllable filled the room with a power he had never felt before. On the other end of the line, there was stunned silence, followed by a sharp intake of breath. "What do you mean, no? Is there a problem with the bank?" "I mean, no, Michael," Richard repeated, his voice steady. "I won't be giving you any more money." The cheerful veneer cracked instantly. "Are you seriously saying this to me right now, after everything we've been through this week?" His voice rose, sharp and indignant. "Everything we've been through?" Richard's hands tightened on the phone. You weren't there for your mother. You chose not to be there. That's not fair, Michael snapped. In the background, Samantha's voice cut in, shrill and demanding. Tell him we need that money. We already spent it. Michael tried again, his tone laced with practiced manipulation. Come on, Dad. You know I'll pay you back. It's just a rough patch. Mom would want you to help us. She'd want the family to stick together. Richard closed his eyes. For years, Eleanor's name had been used as a shield, a weapon, an excuse for every handout. This time it would not work. Your mother wanted you at her funeral, Richard said quietly. Silence answered him, followed by heavy breathing. Finally, Michael spat out. Fine, we'll figure it out ourselves. Max out more cards, borrow from Samantha's parents, whatever. But don't expect us to come around much anymore if this is how you're going to be. For 35 years, that threat had worked like a leash. His presence for payment, his absence for punishment. Richard felt the weight of it lifting, the chains snapping with each second of silence. I understand, Richard replied. You what? Michael's voice cracked. I understand, Richard repeated, calm and final. Take care of yourself. Before Michael could respond, Richard ended the call. The phone sat silent on the desk, no longer an instrument of control, but a symbol of something broken clean. For the first time in decades, he had denied his son. Richard leaned back in his chair, the quiet pressing in, and felt a strange new strength settle in his chest. His grief was still raw, but beneath it something sharper began to take shape. He looked at Eleanor's photograph again, her kind eyes gazing at him from another life. You were right to worry, he whispered to her. But it ends now. Outside, Davenport streets carried on as if nothing had changed. Inside the Hale home, however, a line had been drawn that would never be crossed again. Richard Hale had spoken a word he once thought impossible. No. And with it, the first stone of reckoning had been laid. If you're still with me, don't turn away now. This was only the beginning. Richard's first no would set in motion a storm that no one, not even Michael, could escape. Stay with the story and see how a grieving husband turned the tables on the son who had mistaken love for weakness. Richard Hale arrived at Foster Construction before sunrise, the building's marble lobby echoing with his footsteps. For years he had walked these halls with pride. The company, a testament to sweat, sacrifice, and 40 years of relentless labor. But this morning, pride had given way to resolve. His son's photograph, smiling confidently in a suit Richard had paid for, hung on the management wall. He paused in front of it, studying the image as if for the first time. Where once he had seen promise, he now saw entitlement. Arrogance painted across every line of Michael's face. In his office, Richard spread the personnel files across the desk like evidence in a courtroom. 8 years of records told a story no father wanted to face. Missed deadlines, inflated expense reports, client complaints ignored, projects delayed because Michael had chosen long lunches over responsibility. For every failing, Richard had made excuses. For every misstep, Eleanor had urged patience. He's still learning, Richard. Give him time. Time had been given. Too much of it. At 8:45, Richard summoned Sarah Mitchell, the company's HR director, into his office. Her expression showed no surprise when he explained his decision. She had been documenting Michael's negligence for years, quietly waiting for the day Richard would stop shielding his son. I'll prepare the termination papers immediately, she said gently. Richard nodded. Security escort? Yes, standard protocol. When she left, he turned to the office mirror and practiced the words. His reflection stared back, jaw tight, voice steady. No emotion, no hesitation. Today he would not be a grieving father. Today he would be the CEO. At 9:30, Michael strolled through the lobby 15 minutes late, coffee in hand, laughter echoing as he joked with a receptionist about recovering from Samantha's birthday party. His careless swagger filled the building, but the eyes of his co-workers darted nervously toward Richard's closed door. Michael Hale, please come to my office immediately. Richard's voice through the intercom was calm, but firm with a weight Michael had never heard before. Sure, Dad, Michael called back casually. Just let me grab my coffee. Now, Michael. The silence that followed was brief but telling. His footsteps, suddenly heavier, approached the office. When Michael pushed the door open and saw Sarah Mitchell seated with paperwork in hand, his smile faltered. "What's with the setup?" he asked, attempting his usual charm. But there was a quiver at the edge of his tone. Richard remained seated, hands folded on the desk. "Michael, your employment with Foster Construction is terminated effective immediately." Michael laughed, a hollow sound. "Very funny, Dad. What's this really about?" Richard slid the paperwork across the polished surface. "Please review these documents and sign where indicated." Michael picked them up, scanning the legal language, his face paling as the truth settled over him. "You can't be serious. This is our company, our family business. This decision is based on your work performance and professional conduct," Richard said evenly. "Your position has been eliminated due to restructuring." Michael's voice cracked. "This is because of yesterday's phone call, isn't it? Look, I'm sorry about the money thing. We can work this out." Richard pressed the security button on his desk. "This is not personal, Michael. It's business." The door opened and Mike Thompson from security stepped in, his posture professional but sympathetic. Michael's face flushed red. "Mom wouldn't want this. She'd never let you throw me out." He leaned forward, trying to summon guilt, the weapon that had always worked before. "Your mother is gone," Richard said, his tone unyielding, "and you've made your choices." Two guards flanked Michael as he gathered his coffee mug and a framed photo of Samantha from his desk. The hallway outside had filled with employees, silent witnesses to the spectacle of the boss's son escorted out like any other terminated worker. "Dad, please," Michael's voice cracked again, this time with desperation. "Think about what this means." Richard met his eyes, steady and cold. "I already have." From his office window, Richard watched Michael load his belongings into his car, shoulders hunched, hands shaking with either rage or humiliation. The boy who had once run into his arms after school now looked like a stranger stripped of everything but anger. When Sarah returned with the signed documents, she handed them over quietly. "All access codes have been changed. His company accounts are disabled." Richard nodded. He rose, walked to the wall, and removed Michael's portrait from its place among the management team. Setting the photo face down in a drawer, he studied the empty space it left behind. The wall looked cleaner without it. The secretary knocked gently on the door. "Mr. Hale, there's someone here demanding to see you, no appointment." The click of designer heels echoed sharply across the marble floor before Richard even spoke. Samantha Hale stormed into the office, her hair slightly windblown, her eyes ablaze. Michael trailed behind, his posture broken, his voice barely audible. "How dare you humiliate Michael like this?" Samantha shouted, pointing a trembling finger at Richard. "This is a private workplace," Richard replied evenly. "You need to leave." "This family business belongs to Michael too," she snapped. "We have bills to pay, a lifestyle to maintain. You owe us at least 6 months severance." Michael tried to intervene, his voice weak. "Sam, let me—" "No!" She cut him off. "He needs to hear this. You're having some kind of breakdown, aren't you? Margaret would be ashamed of you." Richard's jaw tightened, but his composure held. He pressed the button again, and security appeared in the doorway. "You'll hear from our lawyer," Samantha hissed as she was ushered away, her protests echoing down the hall. When the noise faded, only Michael remained, his final words trembling with quiet desperation. "I'm all the family you have left." Richard looked at him, seeing not a son but a stranger who had traded love for entitlement. "No," Richard said at last. "You're just someone who used to be my son." Michael's face crumbled. Without another word, he turned and left. Richard stood in the silence of his office, his hands trembling slightly. He looked at Eleanor's photo on the desk. "I hope you understand," he whispered. Outside, the company carried on as if nothing had changed. But inside Richard's office, a father had severed the final bond that had once held him captive. Whispers travel faster than wind in a town like Davenport, and by the time Richard Hale left Robert Chen's law office that afternoon, the story of Michael's absence at Eleanor's funeral had already begun to spread. He hadn't planned to unleash the storm. It happened naturally, like truth breaking through soil, long starved of light. The meeting with Robert had been deliberate, precise, the way Richard conducted business when emotions threatened to interfere. The mahogany desk gleamed between them, stacks of legal documents waiting. I want to create a new will, Richard said, his voice steady. Michael will be excluded completely. Everything goes to the Eleanor Hale Memorial Foundation. Robert had been his friend for 2 decades, but even he couldn't mask his shock. Richard, this is irreversible. Are you certain? I've never been more certain, Richard replied. Eleanor gave her life to causes she cared about. Education, cancer research, community programs. I want her memory to live through those things, not squandered by a man who chose a party over his mother's funeral. Robert studied him for a long moment, then nodded. We'll build it into an irrevocable trust, untouchable, ironclad. As the pen moved across paper after paper, Richard felt something unexpected. Not vengeance, but release. He was no longer chained to Michael's demands, no longer the financier of his son's waste. For the first time in years, his decisions served Eleanor, not Michael. That evening at the country club, Richard stood quietly with William Hayes and his wife Nancy. Patricia Morton, Eleanor's sister, joined them, her face etched with grief, still fresh from the funeral. I kept looking for Michael, Patricia said, her voice trembling. Where was he? Richard's lips tightened. He chose not to attend. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the clink of crystal glasses from another room. Patricia blinked. Chose not to? He repeated Michael's exact words, sparing nothing. He told me Samantha's birthday party was more important, that Eleanor's funeral was once, but birthdays happen every year. Disgust rippled across their faces. Within minutes, Nancy was on the phone, her voice low but urgent. By nightfall, the Women's Bridge Club knew. By morning, the story had spread across Davenport's social circles like a wildfire no one wanted to stop. The first fracture appeared when Samantha attended her yoga class at the exclusive studio downtown. Midway through, the instructor approached, voice cold. We prefer members who honor family values. Samantha was asked to leave in front of the entire group. Michael's humiliation followed quickly. His golf foursome excused themselves after only a few holes, the pro shop manager gently suggesting he might feel more comfortable elsewhere. At Romano's, the restaurant where he and Samantha had always demanded the best table, their reservation was suddenly lost. Calls to the country club were returned politely but firmly. Membership canceled, effective immediately. Each rejection chipped away at the gilded life they had built on Richard's money. At Bergdorf's boutique, where Samantha once received champagne while shopping, her credit application was mysteriously delayed. A sales associate whispered within earshot, "Not the kind of family we want representing us." The humiliation spread beyond leisure. Michael's business contacts stopped returning calls. Job interviews were canceled at the last minute, wordless rejections replacing polite excuses. At the Chamber of Commerce luncheon, conversations ended abruptly when he approached. Davenport had made its decision. The son who abandoned his mother's funeral had no place among them. Samantha's fury grew each day. "Do you understand what you've done to us?" she screamed one night, her voice carrying through their neighborhood. "We're outcasts, all because you couldn't show up for one service." Michael tried to defend himself, but the words collapsed under their own weakness. Even he could see the connections unraveling, the polite smiles that now hid disdain. Richard, meanwhile, heard of these developments through whispers, sympathetic glances, and the quiet satisfaction of those who believed justice had been served. For once, he did not intervene. He did not cushion the fall. He let it happen, because it was not cruelty, it was consequence. One morning, while sipping coffee alone in the kitchen, Richard's phone rang. The bank manager's tone was clipped, professional, uneasy. "Mr. Hale, Michael and Samantha's mortgage is delinquent, 60 days now. As guarantor, we'll need you to cover the payment." Richard set his cup down gently. The moment felt inevitable, like a storm cloud that had been gathering for years finally breaking. "I'll be in tomorrow," he said. "We'll discuss changes to that arrangement." As he hung up, Richard looked at Eleanor's photo on the mantel. Her eyes, soft and kind, seemed to watch him with approval. He spoke aloud into the stillness. "You gave everything to him, Ellie, but I won't anymore. Not another dollar, not another moment." Outside, the wind rustled through the trees Eleanor had planted in their front yard, the same trees that had shaded Michael as a boy. They stood tall still, their roots deep and unshakable. Richard felt the same strength stirring in him now. He understood what came next. Financial ties would be cut just as cleanly as the personal and professional ones. Michael had chosen his path. Now he would learn what it meant to walk it alone. And for those of you following Richard's journey, this was where the reckoning sharpened. The social exile was only the beginning. Stay with the story, because what comes next will strike harder than any humiliation Davenport could deliver. The marble lobby of First National Bank gleamed with the polish of old money, oil portraits of Davenport's founders staring down at Richard Hale as he walked past. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, catching the slow churn of the Mississippi River outside. He moved with purpose, his leather briefcase in hand, his expression unreadable. David Harrison, the bank manager, rose nervously when Richard entered his corner office. The mahogany desk between them was already stacked with documents, mortgage papers, loan guarantees, promissory notes. Each page bore Michael's name, each signature binding Richard to obligations he no longer intended to honor. "Alan," David caught himself. "Richard, thank you for coming on such short notice. Your son's mortgage is now 60 days delinquent. We've covered 3 months with your guarantee, but—" "I'm withdrawing it," Richard interrupted, calm as stone. He opened his briefcase and slid a folder across the desk. Inside, Robert Chen's paperwork detailed the legal withdrawal of every guarantee tied to Michael and Samantha. 30 days notice, executed perfectly. David's face paled. "Richard, I don't think you understand." "I understand exactly," Richard said. "For 8 years I carried them. That ends now." The bank's attorney confirmed the legality over speakerphone, his voice clipped, professional, unyielding. David swallowed hard. "Then we'll have no choice but to begin foreclosure proceedings." "Do what you must," Richard replied. His tone was free of malice, free of guilt. Only finality. That same afternoon across town, Michael sat in his aging Toyota outside yet another office park. His 10th interview in 2 weeks had ended the same way as all the others. Polite smiles, quick handshakes, the promise of, "We'll be in touch," that really meant never. He had walked in with rehearsed excuses about new opportunities and personal growth, but his interviewers had already heard the story. Everyone in Davenport knew. His absence at his mother's funeral had become more than gossip. It was a verdict. He slumped against the steering wheel, staring at the empty passenger seat where Samantha used to sit during better days, laughing at their plans. Now her laughter had turned to venom. That evening, Samantha stormed into their living room, credit card statement in hand. Her heels clicked like gunshots against the hardwood floors. "They canceled the Nordstrom account," she shrieked. "Do you understand what that means? We can't even buy basics without humiliation. I tried to purchase mascara, Michael. Mascara. They told me the guarantor had withdrawn. Your father cut us off." Michael rubbed his face, exhaustion written across every line. "I'll figure it out." "You'll figure it out." Samantha's voice cracked with hysteria. "You've ruined us. The house, the club, the cars, all gone. Do you realize what people are saying about me? About us? I didn't marry into this to end up a joke." The lights flickered and then went out, plunging the house into darkness. A notice from the utility company lay on the counter, unopened, unpaid bills, disconnected service. Samantha's scream filled the room. "Fix this or I'm gone." That night they ate cold leftovers by candlelight, their luxury reduced to shadows on the walls. The next week was a slow unraveling. Michael's credit applications were denied instantly. His debt-to-income ratio had become toxic. Samantha's designer heels clattered angrily as she paced, her jewelry boxed up for quick sales. They held a garage sale on a Saturday morning, their once-prized possessions laid out on folding tables. Wedding gifts worth hundreds sold for $20. Michael's golf clubs went to a teenager with a crumpled 20 in his hand. Former friends drove by, slowing to watch but never stopping. The repossession truck arrived for Samantha's BMW in broad daylight. Neighbors peered from behind curtains as Michael pleaded with the driver, his voice breaking. Samantha cursed loud enough for the whole block to hear. The driver only shrugged and loaded the car. Richard drove past that evening, slowing his sedan enough to glimpse the scene. Furniture scattered across the lawn, Samantha screaming at Michael, his shoulders bent under the weight of failure. Richard did not stop. He did not intervene. He simply observed. Because this was not vengeance. This was consequence. The following weeks dragged Michael further down. Samantha's threats escalated. I'm not living like this. You promised me a life. Instead, you've dragged me into shame. One evening, her confession cut deeper than any insult. I've been talking to Aaron again, she said coldly, referring to her ex-boyfriend, a restaurant owner. At least he knows how to take care of me. Michael stared at her, the words hitting harder than any foreclosure notice. She left 2 days later, slamming the door on their gutted house and his unraveling dignity. By the time the county posted foreclosure signs on the lawn, Michael was a hollow version of himself. His once polished suits hung loose on his frame, his eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights. He watched strangers pick apart his possessions. The life built on his father's money reduced to cardboard boxes and secondhand sales. Inside his empty home, Michael found one last remnant, Eleanor's crystal vase, tucked carefully in a drawer. He held it for a long time, remembering a mother who had loved him without conditions, who had sacrificed without question. Tears slipped down his face for the first time in months, though he could not say if they were for her or for himself. Meanwhile, Richard sat in his study, files neatly stacked, always Eleanor's photograph watching him. The collapse had come faster than even he expected. The social exile had stripped Michael of standing. The financial exile had stripped him of security. And now consequence would strip him of pride. The reckoning is complete. Yet Richard felt no triumph, no gloating satisfaction, only a quiet, steady justice. Eleanor had always said actions carry consequences. At last, Michael was learning hers had not been empty words. The November wind rattled the windows of Richard Hale's home as twilight bled into night. He sat in Eleanor's floral armchair, her journal open across his lap, when the doorbell rang. The sound cut through the silence like a summons. Rising slowly, Richard crossed the hardwood floor and peered through the glass. Michael stood on the porch. For a long moment, Richard did nothing. His son's figure wavered in the porch light, gaunt and unshaven. His clothes wrinkled, his shoulders hunched beneath a weight that looked heavier than shame. At last, Richard pulled the door open, but he did not step aside. Dad, Michael began, his voice unsteady. I know I messed up. I've made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but I've changed. I'm not the same man I was. Richard said nothing. The cold air curled between them, carrying the smell of damp leaves. Michael pressed on, words tumbling fast, rehearsed. I live in a studio apartment above a laundromat. I'm working at a gas station for minimum wage. Samantha's gone. She left me for someone else. I get it now. What matters? I finally understand. Richard studied him, his face unreadable. I can be the son Mom wanted me to be, Michael said desperately. I can be here for you now. You don't have to be alone in this house. Richard's hand tightened on the doorframe. His voice was quiet, measured. When is your mother's birthday? Michael blinked. June 15th. Wrong. Richard's eyes would not waver. What was her favorite flower? Roses, Michael answered quickly. Richard's silence was sharper than any accusation. She loved daisies. You never knew her at all. Michael's face flushed. Dad, come on, this is ridiculous. Just tell me what you want me to say. I'll say it. No, Richard said, and for the first time his voice carried steel. I don't want words. I've heard words for 35 years. I want truth. Michael faltered, then let the mask drop. Okay, yes, I need help. The eviction notices keep coming. The bills are killing me. I'll pay you back, I swear. You can afford it. You know you can. Richard turned, walked into the living room, and returned with Eleanor's journal. He opened it to a page written in her delicate script, the ink pressed deep into the paper as though her heart had carved it there. I'm worried Michael only loves our money. What if we've raised a child who can't love? Richard read the words aloud, his voice steady despite the tremor in his chest. When he looked up, Michael's face had gone pale. She knew, Richard said. She died knowing what you are. Michael's desperation cracked into anger. You can't mean that. She loved me. She'd want you to help me. I'll contest the will. I'll drag this into court. People will see what you've done. An old man, losing his mind, cutting his only son out of everything. Richard's expression didn't change. She changed her will herself. She left you nothing. She knew you'd waste it. The fury erupted then, unmasked and raw. I hope you die alone in this house, Michael spat, his voice rising to a scream. Richard stepped back and closed the door with a quiet finality, shutting out the pounding fists, the shouted curses, the storm of rage that once would have broken him. He walked calmly to the kitchen, set water to boil, and prepared tea while his son's anger echoed outside. At last, the noise faded. The car engine started, tires squealing into the distance. Silence returned, broken only by the whistle of the kettle. Richard carried his cup into the living room and sat once more in Eleanor's chair. He held her journal in his hands, the words of a woman who had given everything and asked for nothing but love. "It's finished, Ellie," he whispered, his voice soft but certain. "It's finished." For those of you still listening, this was the moment Richard closed the chapter on a lifetime of sacrifice. He had spoken the truth no father wants to say, and with it, he set himself free. But was this truly the end of Michael's hold over him, or just the beginning of a darker reckoning? Stay with the story because the storm has not yet passed. Spring sunlight fell gently across Riverside Cemetery, glinting on the polished granite of Eleanor Hale's headstone. Richard knelt before it, his knees pressing into the soft grass, a fresh bouquet of daisies in his hand. He arranged them carefully, straightening each stem the way Eleanor used to do when she filled their kitchen vases. 1 year, he murmured. His voice carried not just grief, but a steadier peace. 1 year since you left. The foundation is thriving, Ellie. 20 scholarships awarded, 200,000 to cancer research. And next month we'll dedicate the new community center on your birthday. The breeze stirred through the oak branches overhead, scattering petals across the path. Richard closed his eyes, letting the moment wrap around him. For the first time in so long, he felt her presence not as absence, but as purpose. Leaving the cemetery, Richard drove into town and parked in front of the Morning Glory Diner. He stepped inside, the doorbell chiming. The scent of fried bacon and strong coffee filled the air, clashing with the memory of finer places he and Eleanor had once dined. Sliding into a booth, he lifted his gaze and froze. Behind the counter in a stained uniform stood Michael. Their eyes met across the crowded diner. Shock flickered across Michael's face, quickly replaced by shame so heavy it bowed his shoulders. He approached slowly, coffee pot trembling in his hand. "How are you doing, Dad?" Michael asked softly, almost timidly. Richard studied him. His son had aged years and months. The arrogance was gone, replaced by lines carved from exhaustion. His once polished frame looked diminished, his eye ringed with shadows. "I'm well," Richard answered simply. Michael poured the coffee, his hands unsteady. "I know sorry isn't enough," he said quietly. "No," Richard said, his tone even. "It isn't." Michael nodded, the words striking him harder than any rebuke. "I understand now what I lost. It wasn't the money. It was you, it was Mom. You just wanted me to love you, not what you could give me." His eyes filled, tears brimming but not falling. Mom won that too, didn't she? Even now. For the first time in years, Richard believed Michael's tears might be genuine. He sipped his coffee, letting the silence stretch before he spoke. "I did what I had to do. Your mother would have approved." Michael's lips trembled. "I know, I deserved all of it." "Yes," Richard replied quietly. "You did." Michael swallowed hard, then asked the question that had lingered between them like smoke. "Is there any way back?" Richard met his gaze, steady and honest. "I don't know, maybe, but not with words. You'll have to prove it. Show me through your actions." The diner buzzed around them, plates clattering, conversations rising and falling. Yet in that small booth, time felt suspended, as if father and son stood at the edge of something fragile, uncertain. Later, driving home, Richard passed by the house that had once belonged to Michael and Samantha. He slowed when he saw children playing in the yard, laughter ringing out across the street. The Ramirez family had bought it at auction. Mr. Ramirez knelt in the garden Eleanor once tended, waving cheerfully when he spotted Richard's car. The house no longer stood as a monument to entitlement. It breathed again, alive with love and gratitude. Richard parked in his own driveway, where the trees Eleanor had planted rustled in the spring wind. Inside, he prepared dinner alone in the kitchen they had once shared. Yet the silence no longer felt oppressive. It felt companionable, as though Eleanor lingered in the hum of the refrigerator, the soft clink of dishes. His phone rang. Grace's name lit the screen. A widow from church, kind-eyed and gentle, she had become a friend, then more than a friend. Richard, her voice smiled through the line. Are we still on for Saturday? Yes, he said, a warmth stirring in him he hadn't expected to feel again. After the call, he stepped into the garden at sunset, pruning the rose bushes Eleanor had loved. The sky burned gold and crimson, and for the first time since her death, Richard felt not only peace but possibility. Justice had been served, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. Michael had faced the weight of consequence. Richard had chosen to honor Eleanor with action, not indulgence. And now, with the foundation flourishing, with the house reborn in the hands of a grateful family, with Grace's laughter waiting, he felt whole. That night, Richard slept soundly, the house settling around him like a companion rather than a tomb. In his dreams, Eleanor appeared, not frail, not fading, but radiant, smiling as she once did when their future stretched wide before them. You did the right thing, Richard, she whispered in the dream. I'm proud of you. He reached for her hand, and though the dream dissolved, peace lingered as he woke to the soft light of morning.